Leave it to Dave Chappelle to spotlight the hypocrisy of Trump supporters who stormed the Capitol. In a new stand-up routine, Chappelle points out that many of the Trump supporters who took part in the insurrection on January 6th are the very same people who criticized former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick for taking a knee during the national anthem as he silently and non-violently protested the treatment of Black Americans by police officers.
Watch the tapes. Watch that crowd that told Colin Kaepernick he can't kneel during a football game, try to beat a police officer to death with an American flag. Look at that. That's what white people did. They felt what black people have been feeling for 400 years. For 30 minutes, stormed the Capitol and rubbed their on the walls. They carried a Confederate flag through the rotunda. The Confederate Army didn't even do that. Mother, you went very far. It was a simple question. Do you have a country or not? And you said no. My God, man, we're in quite the pickle, aren't we?
My colleague Don Lemon joins me now to talk about this. I just wonder, obviously we see a double standard that is played out here. I just wonder how you've been struck by what Dave Chappelle said, Don.
Hi, Brianna. I agree with Dave Chappelle, and then I actually don't agree with him in a sense, but mostly I do. Here's why. Because he said in, in the stand-up routine that they got the N-word treatment, right? I don't think that they did, because they weren't lynched. They were able to leave Washington, D.C. and go back to their respective places of where they lived, and got to turn themselves in if they even dared, if they even decided to, whenever they wanted. And they got to live where they wanted. They didn't get redlined. They got to get loans if they want. So I understand what he is saying. So yes, overall, I do agree with him. But for 30 minutes, they, tried to storm the Capitol and police beat them back. What they got was the consequences of breaking and entering. But his whole point about the flag and Colin Kaepernick is spot on, because they used, as we have been pointing out, the American flag and Blue Lives Matter flags and flagpoles and Confederate battle flags to beat police officers, to try to kill police officers. So, that's where we are right now. So in a sense, his overall point, I get it, but they didn't really get the treatment that African Americans have had in this country.
And that's a point a lot of people have made, right? What would have happened if you were to have a role reversal here? What would have happened? What would the ramifications have been? Would the carnage have been so much greater? I think it's a very reasonable question that a lot of people have asked. I'm also curious what you think about something that Republican Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin has said, because he has this very bizarre new take on the Capitol riots. He doesn't think that it was an armed insurrection. So let's listen to that.
This didn't seem as like an armed insurrection to me. I mean, armed, when you think here of armed, don't you think of firearms? Mm-hmm. Here's questions I would have liked to ask. How many firearms were confiscated? How many shots were fired? I'm only aware of one, and I'll defend that law enforcement officer for taking that shot. It was a tragedy, okay? But I think there was only one. Mm-hmm. If that was a planned armed insurrection, man, you have really a bunch of idiots.
We did this whole analysis of that, Don, last hour, where we looked at all the weapons that were seized. We looked at, obviously you mentioned that people just walked out of the Capitol. They weren't even searched for weapons. There were many weapons. Clearly, this was a deadly insurrection. What do you make of someone defending this is not a big deal?
The hoops that people will jump through for, first of all, their political ideology, second of all, their way of life, and to continue white supremacy. That's what that is. Because if you look at the definition of armed, right? If you look at the definition of armed, it says furnished with weapons. We know they had weapons. We know they had tear gas. We're not sure of all the weapons they had because they were allowed to go. And you bring up a very good point that I neglected to bring up. If this was a black people storming the Capitol, mostly men, they would have been shot. I think everyone agrees with that. That it would have been much worse. Furnished with something that provides security, strength, or efficacy. That doesn't necessarily mean guns. It can mean guns, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. Those flagpoles means being armed as well. I think he got the one part of it right, that it was, I think he said that they were idiots or something. They were a bunch of idiots, or they, if they didn't, because they didn't carry it off very well. That part he got right. But I think it shows, as does that attack on the Capitol, the lengths that people will go to protect white supremacy. And that's exactly what Ron Johnson is doing.
If you ask Senator Ron Johnson, I am sure he would not see what he's doing as, maintaining the power structure of white supremacy.
Well, just because you're ignorant of it doesn't mean that you.
Solomon, black man, election manager, Ambazonian with the vote.
Election don't come.
Yes,
As we dey vote, we go.
for true.
They say they will be no. Now there we go, they go. By election to heaven,
All my with the photo.
many don't win the vote. For the sake of the gospel, brother, we go suffer, we go. As the election don't come,
We must vote.
as we dey vote, we go.
Oh yes,
Brother, when we go to you, now you don't win the vote. Look, you don't lost the vote, you. Say, I don't win the vote.
yes.
Now God don't give me the vote, oh, brother. My enemies, they will shame.
For true.
Look, you don't lost the vote, you.
Yes.
Say, I don't win the vote. Now God don't give me the vote, oh, brother. My enemies, they will shame. As the election don't come,
We go vote.
as we dey vote, we go.
Okay.
Brother, when we go to you, now you don't win the vote. Now your flag, the flag, the go so.
My flag.
As you dey jubilate, they see.
Ha
Now God don't give you the vote, oh, brother. Your enemy, they go shame.
Oh yes.
I go dey pop champagne, the go.
Okay.
As
Okay.
I dey jubilate, they see. Now God don't give me the vote, oh, brother. My enemies, they will shame. Look, you don't lost the vote, you.
Yes.
Say, I don't win the vote. Now God don't give me the vote, oh, brother. My enemies, they will shame. Look, you don't lost the vote, you. Say, I don't win the vote.
Yes.
Now God don't give me the vote, oh, brother. My enemies, they will shame. It's not by weapon of war.
Not weapon of war. Oh.
No, your multitude of soldiers.
Not been a plain soldiers.
By the salvation of God, oh, brother. Now he don't give me the vote. I've been campaigning for so many.
So many years, oh.
Under the rain and sun.
Oh, we sweat, brother.
Finally, God don't give me the vote, oh. My enemies, they will shake. I go the jubilate, they see.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
This praise is to God.
Thank you, Lord. To the generals on the ground floor, I find them all your faithfulness. From north to south, the Amazonian population, I say high five. You have been the vow. I welcome you all, Ambazonia. God bless you.
Well, just because you're ignorant of it doesn't mean that you're not doing it. Just because you have done it for so long doesn't mean that you're not doing it. Just because you have been in a position where many Republicans who sat in on those impeachment hearings and said, I had never seen that much video. What does that mean? Video of the insurrection. What does that mean? That you have been in a position of privilege where you didn't have to. And so just because you're ignorant of something doesn't mean that it does not exist, and it doesn't mean that you aren't doing it. So that is exactly what Ron Johnson is doing it, and perhaps Ron Johnson and others who are like him, this isn't just about him, perhaps they should take a moment to reflect on their actions and to reflect on and to think about it before they say things like that. Because they can't continue to say things like that and to live in the world that they're living in, because there will be more insurrections. There will be more violence to come if they continue to do that, because again, it's just ignorance. Ignorance does not mean that something does not exist and that you're not doing it.
And I'm sure that you've seen Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger, who voted to impeach, he voted to convict Donald Trump in his second impeachment trial for inciting the riot. He's now being shunned by his own family, and it's not just a matter of sort of a private division. It is a letter. I mean, it is something that they've wanted to do very publicly. This has been signed by 11 of his family members, and granted, this is a big family in Illinois. So these are, family members he might see at events here or there, right? But they're family members. And they wrote this: Adam, oh my, what a disappointment you are to us and God. We were once so proud of your accomplishments. Instead, you go against your Christian principles and join the devil's army, Democrats and fake news media. And I think, one of the reasons, Don, that this stands out so much to people is because there are families all across the country that have been divided like this. I mean, they have just been torn apart by what is true and what isn't true, and having different opinions of that.
There's so much there when it comes to that letter, Adam Kinzinger and Republicans and Trump supporters as a whole. Trump supporters have taken over the Republican Party. The Republican Party can no longer say that they don't agree with the insurrectionists, with the bigots, with the racists, with the white supremacists, with the anti-Semites, because that's what they have clearly shown through their actions, especially over the last 5 years. With him showing that letter, it's, first of all, they should probably figure out what Christianity really means. And I think that I would love to ask Adam Kinzinger that, but he has so far refused to come on the show and take questions. But I would like to ask him, where were he, and I'm glad that he's doing it, don't get me wrong, and I think we should take people where they are and then move forward. But I want to know where Republicans like Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney and all of the others, where they were when this stuff was festering in the Republican Party for years, where people who even before them, when it was the welfare queens and the Willie Hortons and the Tea Party and the effigies of Barack Obama and the bones in his nose and the wasn't born in this country, the birtherism and all of that and all of the little things that led up to this moment, where were they? And I think that people need to really answer for those things, because we have to start at the beginning. We can't just start with what happened on January 6th, because that was what? A symptom, a culmination of something. We can't just start with what happened over the summer, because that was a symptom, a culmination of something. It's interesting, Brianna, not to just go too far off on a tangent, but I'm sure you've seen this thing that would happen with The Bachelor and with the host of The Bachelor saying, what the young lady did in it was 2018 and we weren't looking at the world through that lens. Yes, we were. Racism has been around this country forever. It started at the inception of this country. And until we go back to the beginning and we start to deal with those things, then we will never address this problem properly. We will never correct this problem. And the one thing that I completely agree with Dave Chappelle on is that if you solve the black man's problem, you solve the problem of the black man, I mean just black people in general in this country, you will solve the bulk of the problems in this country. You will solve the racism problem, you will solve the poverty problem, you'll solve the discrimination problem, you'll solve the healthcare problem, you'll solve all of those things because it will lift the veil on all the indignities that have been done to people throughout the